Timta, Abdur Kul, Shayuat, Biwah Samos, Shil Pa Timta, Anuki Maku, Nubu Ayunat Sagar, Maku, Shil at Sekhata Am, Shil Yamasi Nuwabiyanat, Wahaza Kalun, Kalum, Chassid Yawum, Kalum, Wahid Meya Talid. Greetings, I'm Chief Nanya-Shaabu Ale of the Atsekata Nation of Yamasee Moors, and this is 5-day comment number 103. This week, we're bringing up, and the article came out a couple weeks back, FBI terrorism unit says black identity extremists pose a violent threat. Now, this is a leaked report citing concerns of retaliation over, quote, perceptions of police brutality against African Americans prompts fears of crackdown on activists. The U.S. government has declared black identity extremists a violent threat, according to a leaked report from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division. The assessment obtained by Foreign Policy has raised fears about federal authorities racially profiling activists and aggressively prosecuting civil rights protesters. The report, dated August 2017 and compiled by the Domestic Terrorism Analysis Unit, says the FBI assesses it is very likely black identity extremist perceptions of police brutality against African Americans spurred an increase in premeditated retaliatory lethal violence against law enforcement and will very likely serve as justification for such violence. Incidents of alleged police abuse have continued to feed the resurgence in ideological motivated violent criminal activity within the BIE movement. The FBI's dedicated surveillance of black activists follows a long history of the U.S. government aggressively monitoring protest movements and working to disrupt civil rights groups. But the scrutiny of African Americans by a domestic terrorism unit was particularly alarming to some free speech campaigners. When we talk about enemies of the state and terrorists, with that comes an automatic stripping of those people's rights to speak and protest, said Mohammed Tadsar, staff attorney with the American Civil Liberties Union. It marginalizes what are legitimate voices within the political debate that are calling for racial and economic justice. Now, let's go back to here. Again, Barack Obama, who was considered a constitutional lawyer, an expert at constitutional law, who said the word black has no standing at law. FBI knows this, CIA knows this, the military knows this, but they're not going to say nothing because it's going to affect the functionability of those agencies. So when we go back to the NCES, definitions for new race and ethnicity categories, and we see what's the definition of black, a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa, the FBI knows there are no black racial groups of Africa. They know this. The black attorneys know this, the black judges know this, the black sheriffs know this, the black police officers know this. Why? Because Barack told the secret. That's why nobody can find this audio from Tom Joyner. And we know Tom Joyner is down with the Luciferians because you can't find that on his website. I've known people who are in radio said they'll get the audio and nobody can get it. Barack probably put an executive order out on that interview he did with Tom Joyner back in 2012. What was the date? October 16th. So for him to, for Barack Obama to say the word black has no standing at law, and he cut Tom Joyner, no, I don't call myself black because the word black has no standing at law. All the people who are up in the power structure, whether they're black and or so-called white, they all know if you call yourself black, you're saying you are a slave. That's what that means. So the FBI is correct. They should be looking at black identity extremists as a violent threat because they are not a people, they're not a language, they're not a land, they're not a culture. They actually are a threat to the corporation. Because if you ask people, well, what is the origin of black? Nobody can tell you. Because remember, black is what? An adjective, and is a descriptive term used. So they're not wrong in doing it. Plus, I want to show another video real quick. This just goes to show you the people that are in the know. Black is a status.
The Dred Scott decision, which was handed down by the Supreme Court in 1857, is one of the most famous or infamous decisions in all of the history of the Supreme Court. And it arose out of some complicated issues, but what it basically had to do with was the power of Congress to prohibit slavery in the Western territories. Dred Scott had been brought as a slave into the territory of Wisconsin, where slavery had been barred by Congress, and later he sued for his freedom on the ground that he had been in a place where slavery had been abolished and therefore should be considered free. And this goes all the way up through various courts, and the Supreme Court eventually rules, no, Dred Scott's not free, because two reasons. One, Congress does not have the right to prohibit slavery in the territories, and this basically declares the Republican Party unconstitutional. The Republican platform, Lincoln's platform, which is to prohibit slavery in the territories, the Supreme Court said you can't do that. Slavery has a right to go anywhere within the country in a territory, not a state. A state can abolish slavery, Illinois did, but the territories which belong to the whole country, slavery has a right to go there. The second principle put down by Chief Justice Taney in the Dred Scott decision was that blacks cannot be citizens of the United States. In a sense, Dred Scott can't even sue because he's not an American. This is one of the best examples of this notion of blacks as aliens. Even though he's born here and everything, he is not an American. The American family, as Taney says, is for white people. And in the most famous sentence in that decision, he says, a black man has no rights which a white man is bound to respect. Now, he's not saying blacks can be killed with impunity. What he's saying is, legally speaking, they are not part of the body politic. They are not part of the we the people that created the Constitution, and therefore they're just outside of this system. So they don't have any rights under the Constitution because the Constitution is for white people.
So, right there is the confession. So all the black civil rights groups, what was it, the American Civil Liberties Union? How is it you guys don't know this? You can't be calling yourself black in a commercial system where black is a status, right? Black is a status, not a nationality. How can you not know this? So you all are doing public defenders, private attorneys, public attorneys are doing a deliberate disservice. Now they're only doing a disservice as long as you keep calling if you call yourself black, they're not doing a disservice. They're only doing a disservice if you change your race and ethnicity to white and American Indian. And as it states here, that the census says you can self-identify. So an individual's response to the race question is based upon self-identification. And individuals were presented in 2000 with the option to self-identify with more than one race. And this continued with the 2010 census. What is race? Data are based on self-identification. So all these black power groups, you're a bunch of renegade slaves. I don't care if you're in law enforcement or not, because you all cannot answer one simple question. Does black have standing at law? We've already proven that. Now on the flip side of that, the aspect, we can't forget this because it's important, because a lot of these black attorneys will tell people, oh, black people or African Americans, you have constitutional right, and they have to be informed that, look, Constitution is a dead document. And the one we have to thank for that was the previous justice, which was Antonin Scalia. Let's see, 2013, oh, okay, 2008. Let's try that one because it's back even later. That makes it 9 years ago. NPR.org. Scalia vigorously defends a dead constitution. Okay, I'm a textualist. I am an originalist. I am not a nut, he says, underscoring that he generally doesn't favor undoing old rulings, which is the Dred Scott decision of 1857. So that Dred Scott decision has not been overturned. So all the black attorneys, black law students, those doing their interns, etc., you all are wasting your time, because he just said here he generally does not favor undoing old rulings. So that means the Dred Scott decision stands. This nonsense about, oh, well, we have rights, or you have rights under the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. No, you don't. Because civil rights are what? A privilege that can be revoked. So the Dred Scott decision still stands. Anyone who calls himself a descendant of Africans, anyone who calls themselves black or African American on contract, you have no rights. And that's why things are happening the way they are happening. So again, the FBI is not wrong. That includes the black FBI, black African American agents. They're sitting there producing and conducting a service which is in violation of the Lieber Code in Article 33. But we'll talk about that later on down the road. But the more important thing is the FBI is not wrong, because they know black has no standing at law. Anyone who's teaching anything pertaining to commerce, if you're not talking about that SF 181, you are not talking about breaking the matrix, getting outside the matrix, or changing the system. All you're talking about is just the same old thing, and you're an actor and an entertainer, period, on contract. Where's this part here? Because I would like to end with that. Where is it here? If you somehow adopt a philosophy that the Constitution itself is not static, but rather it morphs from age to age to say whatever it ought to say, which is probably whatever the people would want it to say, you've eliminated the whole purpose of a constitution. And that's essentially what the living Constitution, quote unquote, leaves you with. For Justice Antonin Scalia, the Constitution is not a living document, but a dead one. So if he's thinking that, all the justices on the U.S. Supreme Court are thinking it, the ones in the lower courts, the federal judges, the state court judges, the local judges, they all know the Constitution is dead. They've run in game on everybody. So with that, like I am white, I am Garifuna, I am indigenous, recognized by the United States government, the United States government, Canadian government, the United Nations. Our nation, ADJECTIVE Nation, is recognized by the United Nations. So this is what you have to do. You cannot claim a commercial term where you have no origin. And before we go, just for everybody to reflect, when you look at white, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa, Ethiopia is in North Africa, and it says original peoples. Black or African American doesn't say anything about original peoples. Black is not a people. Asian has original peoples, American Indian has original peoples, and Native Hawaiian has original peoples. But black or African American doesn't. So that means all law enforcement know black people are not people. They are just blacks, slaves. And in certain terms, Negroes. I won't say niggers because that goes to niggas, which means royalty. And with that, this is 5-day comment number 103. Again, you all better get white and get right. We have our Indigenous Standing Process, and we have it every Tuesday. And we have that on Zoom, and you can send an email to Nicole Nicholas, NicoleNicholas90@gmail.com. I'll make sure it's put in the comments, and you can give a call 587-501-7262. White power, Abyud Gadur, Abyud Gadur, Abyud Gadur.